That's a $500 fine for each of those. Aggressive beasts. Karen snarled, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at Rex and Shadow. And another 1,000 for the unauthorized kennel structure. Pay up by Friday or the liens start. I just stared at her, the crisp white envelope in her hand looking absurdly official against the backdrop of my quiet suburban backyard. My dogs, two of the most disciplined and decorated Belgian Malinois on the entire state K-9 roster, sat perfectly still at my side, their heads cocked as if trying to understand the source of the shrill, angry noise polluting our Saturday afternoon. Rex let out a low, questioning whine, and Karen flinched back as if he'd just lunged for her throat. Her face, a puffy mask of indignation, was framed by a helmet of lacquered blonde hair that seemed to defy the gentle breeze. She was the president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association, a title she wore with the gravity of a 4-star general, and in the 3 months since I'd moved in, she had become the self-appointed warden of my personal peace. The fine she was brandishing wasn't a warning. It was a declaration of war, a $2,000 salvo fired directly into the tranquility I had worked my entire life to earn. If you think that's insane, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I want to hear your own HOA nightmares, because I promise you, this is just the beginning. My name is Frank Miller, and for 25 years, I was a cop. I worked my way up from a patrolman walking a beat in the worst part of the city to homicide detective and, eventually, to chief of police in the neighboring city of Northgate. I'd seen the worst of humanity, navigated the labyrinth of city politics, and managed a department of over 300 officers. I'd earned my retirement. My wife, Sarah, had passed away from cancer 5 years prior, and the big house we'd raised our kids in felt like a museum of echoes. So, I sold it and bought a smaller place in Oakwood Estates. It was advertised as a quiet, prestigious enclave, a place where people respected each other's privacy and property. It was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where the loudest noise was the birds in the morning and the biggest conflict was deciding what to grill for dinner. For the first few weeks, it was exactly that. I spent my days landscaping the yard, setting up my workshop in the garage, and enjoying the simple, profound silence of a life no longer dictated by scanners and emergency calls. My partners in this new life were Rex and Shadow. They weren't pets in the traditional sense. They were family, and they were still active-duty assets. I had a special arrangement with my old department to remain their handler on a reserve basis for high-stakes calls. They were specialists in narcotics detection and suspect apprehension, and keeping them sharp was part of the deal. That required a proper facility. Before I even closed on the house, I submitted plans to the city for their kennel. It wasn't some chain-link cage. It was a custom-built, climate-controlled structure at the far corner of my half-acre lot, complete with heated floors, an automated watering system, and a dedicated septic line. It was insulated for sound and surrounded by a secondary privacy fence, ensuring the dogs were secure, comfortable, and completely unobtrusive. The city planning department approved it without a single note, calling the plans exemplary for working animal welfare. I foolishly assumed that city approval was all I needed. I had read the thick binder of HOA covenants, a document dense enough to stop a bullet, but saw only vague language about outbuildings being in harmony with the aesthetic of the community, which I felt my clean, professionally built structure certainly was. I had underestimated the power of a bored tyrant with a clipboard. Karen had introduced herself the day I moved in, not with a welcome basket, but with a passive-aggressive comment about my moving truck blocking the sight lines of the street. I saw her watching from her window across the street, her silhouette a constant, judgmental presence. The first official notice came a month later, a violation for my garden hose being coiled imperfectly. The second was for my garbage cans being visible from the street for 65 minutes after the designated pickup time. I complied without complaint, dismissing it as the petty pedantry of someone with too much time on her hands. But the dogs, that was different. That was a line. She wasn't just attacking my property. She was attacking my partners, my family. The aggressive beasts she referred to had found a missing child in the national forest last year and had sniffed out a fentanyl shipment that could have killed hundreds. They were heroes, and this woman was fining me for their very existence, based on a bylaw against breeds with a known history of aggression. A piece of ignorant, prejudiced nonsense that a simple Google search could debunk. The battle wasn't just about the money or the kennel or even the dogs. It was about the principle. I had spent my life enforcing laws that were rooted in reason and justice. I could not bow to the arbitrary whims of a petty dictator in a pantsuit. As she stood there in my yard, her chest puffed out with self-importance, I gave Rex a quiet hand signal. He immediately laid down, placing his head on his paws, the picture of placid obedience. Shadow followed suit. Karen's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing her face before the mask of authority snapped back into place. "The fines stand, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice tight. Friday, she spun on her sensible shoed heel and marched back across my lawn, leaving a trail of righteous indignation in her wake. I picked up the envelope she'd dropped at my feet. The paper was thick, expensive. It felt heavy with the weight of the fight to come. I looked down at my dogs. They looked back up at me, their intelligent brown eyes filled with unwavering trust. They had no idea what was happening, only that I was there, and that they were safe. I intended to keep it that way. I let Karen's ultimatum hang in the air for a day, allowing my initial anger to cool and my professional instincts to take over. Reacting emotionally was a rookie mistake, and Karen was, in essence, a suspect in the future case I was building in my head. The first rule of any investigation is to know your adversary and understand their methods. I went inside and laid the violation notice on my granite countertop. It was professionally printed, with the HOA logo embossed at the top. The language was boilerplate legalese, clearly drafted by an attorney, but the specific infractions, possession of aggressive breed animals, 2, and unapproved auxiliary structure, 1, were filled in with a pen whose ink was a shade of purple so offensively cheerful it could only have been chosen by Karen herself. My first step was not to confront, but to comply, or at least to appear to comply with the established process. Antagonizing her further would only give her ammunition. I needed to be the calm, reasonable one, the one who followed the rules while she, I suspected, was bending them to her will. That evening, I drafted a formal letter of appeal to the HOA Board of Directors. I didn't write it as a cop or as an angry homeowner. I wrote it as a concerned member of the community seeking clarification. I addressed each point with meticulous detail. For the aggressive breeds violation, I attached copies of Rex's and Shadow's official K-9 certifications from the North American Police Workdog Association. I included their full training records, which detailed thousands of hours of obedience, scent detection, and controlled aggression training, the key word being controlled. I enclosed letters of commendation from my former department, the DEA, and even a thank you letter from the family of the little girl Rex had found. I explained that Belgian Malinois were not an aggressive breed, but a high-drive working breed, and that their temperament was more stable and predictable than that of many of the yapping, untrained lapdogs I saw around the neighborhood. For the unauthorized structure, I attached a copy of the city-approved building permit, the complete architectural blueprints, and a portfolio of photographs showing the kennel from every angle, highlighting its clean lines and how the dark green siding blended seamlessly with the surrounding foliage. I politely requested the specific bylaw I was in violation of, as my reading of the covenants found no language that would preclude such a structure, especially one with prior municipal approval. I concluded the letter by inviting the board to my property for a personal demonstration of the dog's temperament and an inspection of the facility. I made 5 copies, one for each of the 4 other board members listed on the HOA website, sent via certified mail to their homes, and one that I would hand-deliver to Karen. The next morning, I saw her patrolling the neighborhood in her golf cart, a veritable chariot of suburban tyranny. I walked out to the curb, letter in hand. She stopped, a flicker of triumph in her eyes, likely assuming I was there to beg or argue. "Mr. Miller," she said, her tone dripping with condescension, "I hope you have a check for me." I offered her the envelope. "This is my formal appeal to the board, Karen. I've sent copies to the other members as well. I believe you'll find everything is in order." She snatched the envelope from my hand, her eyes narrowing. "The board doesn't review appeals for clear-cut violations. This is a waste of time. The fines are due Friday. The bylaws state that any member has the right to appeal a fine to the full board. I said, my voice even. I'm exercising that right. I'm sure you, as president, want to ensure all proper procedures are followed. Her face tightened. I had called her bluff on procedure. She couldn't very well deny me the process, however much of a sham it might be, without exposing her own disregard for the rules she claimed to cherish. Fine, she snapped, tossing the letter onto the passenger seat of the golf cart as if it were contaminated. The board will review it. But don't get your hopes up. She sped off without another word. The response came exactly 1 week later. It wasn't a thoughtful reply or a request for the inspection I'd offered. It was another sterile, white envelope. Inside was a form letter. A single paragraph stated that the board had reviewed my appeal and found it to be without merit. The original fines were upheld. And, due to my failure to remit payment in a timely manner, a late fee of $200 had been added. The letter was signed, not by the full board, but only by Karen as president. There was no explanation, no counter-argument to the mountain of evidence I had provided. It was a bureaucratic middle finger. That's when I knew this was not a dispute to be resolved through reason. It was a campaign to be won through strategy. I took the denial letter and placed it in a new file folder. I labeled the folder Karen, and on the inside cover, I started a timeline. Every interaction, every letter, every deadline was logged with date, time, and a brief description. I took photographs of the new violation notice. I went to my home office and pulled out the gear I hadn't used since my detective days. A digital voice recorder, a small notebook for field observations, and a pair of binoculars. From my upstairs office window, which had a clear view of Karen's house, I began to watch. Not in a creepy way, but in a professional one. I observed her patterns. Her morning patrols, the contractors who visited her home, the other board members who came and went. The war was no longer about a kennel and 2 dogs. It was about dismantling an empire, and I was going to do it by the book, her book, and the laws. She had built her fortress out of paper, and I would tear it down with paper of my own. The dismissal of my appeal confirmed my hypothesis. This was not a board of directors, it was a monarchy. Karen wasn't an administrator. She was a ruler, and the other board members were likely either her cronies or too intimidated to challenge her. To fight her, I needed to understand the kingdom she had built. My quiet observation from my office window was Phase 1. Phase 2 was reconnaissance on the ground. I started taking Rex and Shadow for long walks through the neighborhood, always on leash, always with them heeling perfectly at my side. It served 2 purposes. It kept the dogs exercised and visible, demonstrating their impeccable behavior to anyone who was watching, and Karen was always watching. And it gave me a chance to casually engage with my neighbors. I wasn't looking for gossip. I was looking for patterns. My first breakthrough came with Mr. Henderson, a retired Marine in his late 70s who lived 3 doors down. I'd seen him meticulously tending to his lawn every morning. His defining feature was a 20-foot flagpole from which a pristine American flag flew day and night, properly illuminated as per flag code. I saw him outside one afternoon, struggling to untangle the rope. I walked over, leaving the dogs in a sit-stay on the sidewalk. "Need a hand with that, sir?" I asked. He looked up, his eyes weary. "This blasted thing. Getting old? Frank." Thanks, together we fixed the halyard. As we stood back to admire our work, he sighed. "Enjoying it while I can. Karen's lot have decided it's a visual nuisance. Says it's not in keeping with the community's aesthetic. Can you believe that? Been flying a flag my whole life." I listened, my face a mask of neutral sympathy. "Did they fine you?" He snorted. $500, and a notice to remove it or face a lien. Sent them a letter quoting federal flag code, which protects the right to display the flag. They sent back a letter from their lawyer saying the HOA covenants supersede federal law. I know it's bull, but I can't afford to fight their shark in court. I filed that away. Karen wasn't just a stickler for rules. She was willing to trample on patriotism and federal law to get her way. A few days later, I struck up a conversation with Maria Rodriguez, who was watching her 2 young sons play basketball in their driveway. Their portable hoop was the source of my next clue. "I have to drag this thing into the garage every single night," she said, rolling her eyes. "We got a $200 fine because it was left out past sunset." Karen called it unapproved recreational equipment. "My boys just want to play." The stories started to form a mosaic of petty tyranny. A fine for a satellite dish that was 6 inches too far to the left. A violation for a wind chime that was deemed acoustically disruptive. A warning for planting rose bushes that weren't on the pre-approved list of flora. Each story was delivered in hushed tones, with a nervous glance toward Karen's house. She had cultivated an atmosphere of fear. People were afraid to talk, afraid to fight back, because she had wielded the HOA's legal authority like a club, crushing any dissent with the threat of expensive litigation. It was time to move from anecdotal evidence to hard data. My years as a detective taught me that every organization, even a suburban HOA, leaves a paper trail. I went to the county clerk's office and requested all publicly available records for the Oakwood Estates HOA. Their articles of incorporation, their annual filings, and, most importantly, any liens they had placed on properties within the community. The clerk handed me a thick stack of files. I spent the rest of the afternoon at a dusty table in the records room, poring over the documents. The number of liens was staggering. In the 5 years since Karen had become president, the HOA had placed liens on over 30 properties, nearly a quarter of the homes in the subdivision. Most were for relatively small amounts, a few hundred to a few $1,000s, but the legal fees tacked on often doubled or tripled the original debt. It was a predatory system. Then I found what I was looking for. I started cross-referencing the vendor payments listed in their sparse annual financial disclosures. The numbers were vague, just lump sums for landscaping, management, and legal, but one vendor name appeared over and over, with payments that had ballooned in recent years. Evergreen Prestige Landscaping, LLC. The payments were substantial, far more than what a community of our size should be paying for lawn mowing and shrub trimming. Back at my home office, I did a corporate record search on Evergreen Prestige Landscaping. The LLC was registered just over 5 years ago, right after Karen took office. The registered agent and sole proprietor was a man named Martin Gable. A quick social media search on Karen, whose last name was Peterson, revealed a trove of family photos from a recent wedding. There, in a garish tuxedo, was Martin Gable. Identified in a caption as her wonderful brother-in-law, the pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just about power. This was a grift. Karen was using her position to funnel exorbitant HOA fees to her family's company. The constant, petty fines weren't just for control. They were a revenue stream, pressuring residents who couldn't pay into liens that solidified the HOA's financial power, which she then used to enrich her own relatives. The kennel, the flagpole, the basketball hoop, they were all pretexts. We were all just marks in her long con. I printed out the corporate filings for Evergreen, the social media photos, and the HOA's financial statements. I placed them neatly into my Karen file. The case was getting stronger, and my resolve hardened. This was no longer a neighborhood dispute. It was a fraud investigation. Realizing that I was dealing with something far more sinister than a simple power trip changed the stakes entirely. Karen wasn't just a bully. She was a criminal hiding in plain sight, using the HOA's bylaws as her shield. And when a cornered animal feels threatened, it lashes out. The escalation began subtly at first, then became brutally overt. The day after my trip to the county clerk's office, a new violation notice appeared on my door. This one for improper lawn maintenance, according to the attached photo, taken from an extreme close-up angle. A single dandelion had dared to sprout near my driveway. The fine was $50. I plucked the dandelion, paid the fine online without comment, and saved the receipt and a screenshot. 2 days later, another notice. My garbage cans, which I had meticulously placed behind the fence of my side yard, were allegedly visible between the slats of the fence from a specific angle on the street, another $50. I paid it. Then came the notice about the numbers on my mailbox. The font, a standard serif that had been there when I bought the house, was suddenly deemed non-compliant with community aesthetic standards. I was ordered to replace them with a specific, pre-approved font. a sample of which was not included. This was pure harassment, a war of 1,000 paper cuts designed to frustrate me into submission or into making a mistake. I knew she was watching me, waiting for me to lose my temper, to give her something she could use against me. I refused to give her the satisfaction. I documented each petty violation, paid each fine, and continued my quiet investigation. The harassment wasn't just bureaucratic. She was trying to poison my reputation. On the community's private social media page, anonymous posts began to appear. Is anyone else concerned about the vicious attack dogs that have moved into our peaceful neighborhood? I've seen them and they look like wolves. My children are scared to play outside. Another post read, I heard the new guy on Elm Street is some kind of ex-cop. You know how they are, always thinking they're above the law? I didn't need to be a detective to know the source. The language, the mix of fear-mongering and veiled insults, had Karen's fingerprints all over it. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. I went out to my truck to head to a training session with the dogs and found all 4 tires flat. Not just low on air, slashed. Deep, deliberate cuts in the sidewalls of all 4 tires. My blood ran cold, then hot. This was a direct physical attack. This crossed the line from a civil matter into a felony. My first instinct was to dust for prints, to pull my own security footage, to run the investigation myself. But I stopped. That's exactly what she would want. She could claim I was using my law enforcement background to intimidate her, that I had fabricated evidence. The investigation had to be unimpeachable. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and called the sheriff's department for the county, not my old department in the city. I needed an outside, unbiased agency to handle it. While I waited for the deputy to arrive, I reviewed the footage from the new security system I'd installed the week before. I had 4 high-definition cameras covering every approach to my house. The camera covering the driveway had a perfect shot. At 2:17 a.m., a figure dressed in a dark, baggy sweatsuit with the hood pulled up low walked cautiously up my driveway. The person's face was obscured, but their build was unmistakable, heavy-set, with a distinct, rolling gait. It was Karen's walk. I'd seen it 100 times as she patrolled the neighborhood. The figure moved quickly, crouching by each tire. A glint of metal flashed in the infrared light. A knife. In less than a minute, the deed was done. The figure then scurried back down the driveway and got into a vehicle parked just out of the main frame of the camera. But the camera caught the tail end of the car as it pulled away. A white SUV. A newer model Cadillac Escalade. Just like the one Karen drove. I saved the footage to a secure cloud server and made 3 separate backup copies on encrypted thumb drives. When the deputy arrived, a young, professional officer named Miller, no relation, I showed him the damage. I told him I had security footage but did not mention my suspicions. I simply said I would provide the footage to the lead detective on the case. Let the evidence speak for itself, I told him. He nodded, understanding completely. This act of aggression was Karen's biggest mistake. She had underestimated me. She thought I was just some retiree she could push around. She had no idea that she had just escalated her petty tyranny into a criminal investigation, and she had provided me with the very evidence I needed to ensure her downfall. The slashed tires were not just an attack on my property. They were a gift. They galvanized my resolve and, as I would soon find out, the resolve of the entire community. The fear she had so carefully cultivated was about to curdle into rage. The game had changed. She had brought a knife to a gunfight she didn't even know she was in. News of the vandalism spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. A slashed tire is one thing. All 4, on the property of a new resident, felt like a targeted act of aggression that violated the community's illusion of safety. The anonymous posts on the community page, which had previously painted me as a threat, now seemed sinister in retrospect. People started connecting the dots. The fear that had kept them silent began to transform into a shared sense of outrage. My quiet, one-on-one conversations with neighbors evolved. I received a knock on my door the evening after the police report was filed. It was Mr. Henderson, the retired Marine, and with him were Maria Rodriguez and a quiet, bespectacled man I didn't know. "Frank," Mr. Henderson said, his voice firm, "we heard what happened. This has gone too far. We need to do something. The man with him introduced himself as David Chun, a retired accountant. I've had my own run-ins with her, David said softly. Questioned some of the budget line items at the last annual meeting and was basically shouted down. I'd be willing to take a look at those financials you mentioned, if you'll have me. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The seeds of dissent I had been planting were finally taking root. I invited them in, and for the first time, I laid out my entire file on the dining room table. The violation notices, the letters, the county records, the corporate filings for Evergreen Prestige Landscaping, the printouts of the social media posts. I told them everything I had discovered about the liens, the inflated contracts, and Karen's connection to the company. As they absorbed the information, their expressions shifted from anger to steely determination. Maria, who had seemed so weary when I spoke to her about the basketball hoop, was now furious. "She's been stealing from us?" she whispered, looking at the invoices. "All those fines are dues. It's all been going to her family." We decided to form a small, unofficial committee. We needed more people, more skills. David knew a woman down the street, Sarah Jenkins, who was a paralegal. Mr. Henderson had a nephew who was a tech wizard. Maria offered to talk to other mothers in the neighborhood, to gather more stories, more evidence of Karen's pattern of abuse. Our next meeting, held 2 days later in my living room, had grown to 7 people. Sarah Jenkins, the paralegal, was sharp and methodical. She took one look at the violation notices and the HOA's denial of my appeal and immediately spotted several potential procedural violations of the state's property code. "She signed this denial herself," Sarah noted, pointing to the letter. "The bylaws require a majority vote of the board for any appeal decision. A single signature might not be legally binding. We need to see the minutes from that board meeting." The tech wizard, a young man named Alex, set up a secure, password-protected website where we could all upload documents, share information, and communicate without using the HOA's monitored social media page. It became our digital war room. While the committee focused on the legal and financial fronts, I focused on fortifying my own position regarding the dogs. The personal attack had made it clear that Karen saw them as my primary weakness. I needed to make them an unassailable strength. I called in favors. I had my former second-in-command at the Northgate PD, Deputy Chief Evans, write a sworn affidavit detailing the millions of dollars in narcotics Rex and Shadow had taken off the streets and their crucial role in numerous high-risk arrests. I contacted the director of the city's Animal Control Division, a woman I'd worked with for years, and had her inspect the kennel and the dogs. Her resulting affidavit described the facility as exceeding all state and federal standards for working animal care, and the dogs as exceptionally well-trained, socialized, and of a stable temperament. Finally, I reached out to Dr. Alistair Finch, one of the country's leading K-9 behaviorists, who had helped design our department's K-9 training protocols. I paid him a consulting fee to drive down, evaluate the dogs, and write a formal report. His 7-page analysis concluded that Rex and Shadow posed less of a risk to the community than the average untrained domestic pet. I now had a stack of expert witness-level documentation that transformed Karen's aggressive beasts narrative into a laughable slander. The binder I was assembling was becoming a weapon, dense with facts, figures, and sworn statements. Each page was a nail in the coffin of Karen's authority. The alliance was solidifying. We were no longer isolated victims. We were a coordinated unit, each member with a role. David, the accountant, was our forensic financier. Sarah, the paralegal, was our legal scout. Alex was our communications officer. Mr. Henderson was our conscience and our leader. Maria was our intelligence network. And I was the strategist, directing the pieces, waiting for the perfect moment to spring the trap. We were fighting back not with anger and emotion, but with cold, hard, undeniable proof. Karen thought she was playing checkers with a bunch of amateurs. She had no idea we were setting up a chessboard for a checkmate she would never see coming. The turning point in our strategy came from Sarah Jenkins, the paralegal. She had spent a week buried in the HOA's covenants, cross-referencing them with state property law. One evening, she called an emergency meeting at my house, her voice buzzing with excitement. She spread a copy of the state code across my dining room table, alongside one of Karen's threatening letters about a lien. "I found it," she announced, her finger tracing a line of text. "It's a procedural error, but it's a catastrophic one. According to state law, before placing a lien on a property, an HOA must send a notice of intent via certified mail that includes specific language about the homeowner's right to a formal hearing. They have to give you 30 days to request that hearing." She looked around the table at our expectant faces. Karen's letters and the letters from the HOA's lawyer, they just demand payment. They threaten a lien, but they don't mention the right to a hearing. They haven't been following the law. David Chun, the accountant, leaned forward. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Sarah said, a slow smile spreading across her face, "that every single lien she has placed in the last 5 years is potentially invalid. It means the HOA has systematically violated the due process rights of every homeowner they've targeted. If we challenge this, a judge would likely throw them all out. Better yet, it opens the door for a massive class action lawsuit against the HOA for illegal debt collection practices." The room was silent for a moment as the weight of her discovery settled in. This was the bombshell. This was the weapon that could not only save us but could liberate the entire neighborhood. My first instinct was to go public immediately, to expose the fraud and incompetence. But strategy dictated patience. A premature reveal would allow Karen and the board to lawyer up, to try to cover their tracks. We needed to let her walk deeper into the trap. We needed her to feel confident, arrogant, right up until the moment the floor fell out from beneath her. Our opportunity came a week later. An official-looking flyer appeared on every door in Oakwood Estates. It was a notice for a special meeting of the Homeowners Association, called by President Karen Peterson. The agenda item was singular: to discuss the ongoing violations at 121 Elm Street, Miller Residence, and to authorize the board to pursue all necessary legal actions, including foreclosure, to ensure compliance with community covenants. She was coming for my house. She was making her final move, and she was doing it in public. The notice itself was another gift. Sarah Jenkins pointed out that it, too, was legally deficient. State law required at least 14 days' notice for a special meeting of this nature. Karen had only given 10. Another procedural error for our collection. The day after the notice was posted, I received a thick package via certified mail. It was from the HOA's law firm, Slate, Hammer, and Stone. Inside was a formal, 20-page legal threat detailing every supposed violation, from the dandelions to the dogs, and culminating in a demand for immediate payment of over $5,000 in fines and legal fees. It stated that if I did not remove the dogs and the kennel within 7 days, the HOA would file a lawsuit seeking a court order for their removal and would immediately begin foreclosure proceedings on my property. They had taken the bait perfectly. I scanned the letter and handed it to Sarah. She read it and laughed. No mention of a hearing. They're still doing it wrong. This is beautiful. We now had a choice. Respond with our own legal threat and turn it into a protracted court battle, or let her have her public spectacle. We chose the spectacle. My lawyer, a sharp civil litigator I'd known for years named Ben Carter, drafted a simple one-paragraph response. It acknowledged receipt of their letter, disputed all claims within it, and confirmed that I would be in attendance at the special meeting to address the board and the community directly. It was non-confrontational, almost passive. It was designed to make them believe I was coming to beg. In the days leading up to the meeting, our committee worked in overdrive. David Chun prepared a series of simple, easy-to-understand charts that showed the dramatic increase in landscaping fees and the flow of money to Karen's brother-in-law. Sarah Jenkins prepared a concise, one-page summary of the state laws the HOA had violated, with the relevant statutes highlighted. Alex, our tech guru, helped me edit the security camera footage of my tires being slashed, isolating the key moments, sharpening the image of the suspect, and zooming in on the make and model of the getaway car. We prepared packets, one for every household in the community. Each packet contained the financial charts, the legal summary, and a list of every fine and lien we could document from talking to neighbors. We didn't distribute them yet. They were our ammunition to be deployed at the moment of maximum impact. The night before the meeting, I felt a familiar calm settle over me. The same feeling I used to get before a major raid. Everything was in place. The evidence was compiled, the allies were ready, and the opponent was overconfident and blind to the ambush that awaited. Karen wanted a public shaming. She was about to get one, but it wouldn't be mine. She had built her kingdom on a foundation of paper and fear. We were about to prove that her entire foundation was illegal, and we were going to do it in front of every single one of her subjects. The community clubhouse was a low-slung brick building with a stuffy, over-decorated meeting room that smelled faintly of stale coffee and air freshener. On the night of the special meeting, it was packed to capacity. Every seat was filled, and people were standing along the back and side walls. I saw the faces of my allies, Mr. Henderson, Maria, David, Sarah, scattered throughout the crowd, their expressions carefully neutral. At the front of the room, a long folding table served as the dais for the board of directors. Karen sat in the center, flanked by the other 4 members, who all looked deeply uncomfortable. Karen, however, was in her element. She wore a bright red blazer, a power color, and wielded her president's gavel like a scepter. She radiated a smug, triumphant energy, the conquering hero about to put the last rebel in his place. She began the meeting by banging the gavel with unnecessary force. This special meeting of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association is now in session, she announced, her voice resonating with manufactured authority. The sole purpose of this meeting is to address the flagrant and persistent covenant violations by the resident at 121 Elm Street, Mr. Frank Miller. She gestured toward a projector screen where a grainy, zoomed-in photo of Rex barking at a squirrel appeared. As you know, the board has worked tirelessly to resolve this issue amicably, she lied, her voice dripping with false sincerity. But Mr. Miller has refused to comply. He insists on harboring these, she paused for dramatic effect, large, aggressive animals in our family-friendly community. He has constructed an illegal outbuilding without approval. He has shown nothing but contempt for the rules that we all agree to live by, the rules that protect our property values and our quality of life. She clicked to the next slide, a picture of one of the violation notices. She went on for nearly 20 minutes, painting a picture of me as an arrogant, rule-breaking outsider who was a danger to the neighborhood. She spun a tale of patient warnings and reasonable requests, all of which I had callously ignored. The crowd was quiet, listening. Some faces were stern, nodding along with her narrative. Others looked uncertain. My allies remained impassive. Finally, she delivered her closing argument. The board has exhausted all other options. Therefore, we are asking for the community's support tonight. We are proposing a vote to authorize the board to take any and all legal action, up to and including foreclosure, to force Mr. Miller into compliance. We must stand together to protect our community from those who believe they are above the law. She looked out at the crowd, expecting a wave of applause. Instead, there was a tense silence. She then turned to me, a cruel smirk on her face. Mr. Miller, the floor is yours. Should you have anything to say in your defense, this was my moment. I calmly walked to the podium at the front of the room, carrying a single, thick binder. I placed it on the lectern and looked out at my neighbors. I didn't look at Karen. I addressed the community. Good evening, I began, my voice steady and clear. My name is Frank Miller. Many of you don't know me, so let me start by introducing myself properly. For the last 5 years of my 25-year career in law enforcement, I had the privilege of serving as the chief of police for the city of Northgate. A low murmur rippled through the room. Eyes widened. I saw Karen's smirk falter for just a fraction of a second. I continued. I moved here seeking peace and quiet, not conflict. I have tried to be a good neighbor. The conflict we are here to discuss tonight is not one I sought, but it is one I intend to finish. I gestured to the screen where the picture of Rex was still displayed. This is my partner, Rex. My other partner, Shadow, is at home. Karen has referred to them as aggressive beasts. I'd like to offer a different description. I clicked a remote, and the picture of Rex was replaced by a high-resolution photo of him wearing his official K-9 unit vest and badge. These are K-9 Officer Rex and K-9 Officer Shadow of the Northgate Police Department. They are 2 of the most highly decorated police dogs in this state. Another image appeared. Rex and Shadow sitting proudly next to a table piled high with millions of dollars worth of confiscated narcotics. Then another. A photo of a tearful mother hugging Rex. A picture taken the day he found her 6-year-old daughter who had been lost in the woods for 2 days. These beasts have done more to protect communities like this one than most people ever will. They are not a threat. They are heroes. And their state-of-the-art, city-approved kennel is not an illegal structure. It is their home, built to ensure their safety and the peace of my neighbors. The atmosphere in the room had shifted entirely. The stern faces were now filled with respect and dawning comprehension. The uncertain faces were now looking at Karen with suspicion. I had established my credibility and dismantled her primary attack. Now it was time to go on the offensive. Having established my own credentials and the true nature of my dogs, I pivoted from defense to prosecution. I left the photo of Rex with the rescued child on the screen for a moment longer, letting the image sink in, a stark contrast to the fear-mongering narrative Karen had woven. Then I turned my attention to the real issue. "This has never been about dogs or a kennel," I said, my voice dropping to a more serious, deliberate tone. "That was just the pretext. This is about money, and it's about abuse of power." I clicked the remote again. The projector now displayed a simple bar chart Davidson had prepared. It showed the HOA's annual landscaping expenditures for the last 7 years. For the first 2 years, the costs were stable around $40,000. The year Karen became president, they jumped to $90,000. The next year, $120,000. This past year, they were budgeted at over $150,000. Gasps and murmurs spread through the audience. "As you can see," I continued, "the moment Ms. Peterson took office, our community's landscaping costs more than doubled, and they have continued to climb ever since. Where is all that money going?" I clicked to the next slide. It was a copy of the state corporate filing for Evergreen Prestige Landscaping, LLC, showing the owner of record, Martin Gable. The slide next to it was a large, smiling photo from Karen's social media page, showing her at a family barbecue with her arm around a man. The caption below read, "A wonderful summer day with my amazing brother-in-law Marty." The room erupted. The murmurs became angry shouts. "Is this true, Karen?" Someone yelled from the back. "You've been paying your own family with our money?" Karen was on her feet, her face pale, then beet red. "That's an outrageous accusation. Evergreen is a competitive bidder. This is slander." "It's not slander if it's true," I said calmly. I gestured to David Chun, who stood up from his seat. "This is David Chun. He's a retired forensic accountant and your neighbor. David, would you mind sharing your professional opinion of the invoices from Evergreen that the board approved?" David, in his quiet, unassuming way, laid out the facts. "The invoices lack detail," he explained. "They contain lump sum charges for grounds maintenance and seasonal planting that are 30 to 40% above market rate. There's no evidence of a competitive bidding process in any of the board's meeting minutes for the last 5 years. From a professional standpoint, these financials show multiple red flags for potential self-dealing and embezzlement." The uproar grew louder. The other board members were shrinking in their seats, trying to become invisible. Karen was banging her gavel, but the sound was lost in the noise. "Order! Order! This is not on the agenda!" she shrieked. It was at that moment that Sarah Jenkins chose to stand. "Actually, Ms. Peterson, this is all very relevant to the agenda," she said, her voice cutting through the din. "The agenda is your proposal to use HOA funds for legal action. The homeowners have a right to know how you've been managing those funds." Sarah walked to the front of the room. "My name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm a paralegal and I live on Oak Circle. And I have some more information that this community needs to hear." She turned to the crowd. "For years, our HOA president has been using fines and liens to intimidate residents. But she hasn't been doing it legally," she explained, in clear, simple terms, the state law regarding the right to a hearing before a lien can be placed. The HOA has failed to follow this procedure, which means that every fine that has resulted in a lien, every legal action they have taken to collect these debts, has been in violation of state law. The weight of this revelation silenced the room again. People were looking at each other, the dawning realization on their faces. Their own fines, their own threats, their own fear. It had all been built on an illegal foundation. Karen's empire was crumbling in real time. But I wasn't finished. I had saved the most damning evidence for last. Abuse of power and financial misconduct are serious, I said, my eyes locking onto Karen's. But some actions cross the line into criminal behavior. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen went dark for a second, then lit up with the black and white infrared footage from my security camera. The room watched in stunned silence as the hooded figure waddled up my driveway. They saw the flash of the knife, the methodical puncturing of each tire. They saw the figure scurry away. And then they saw the final, damning shot. The figure getting into a white Cadillac Escalade, the same one parked in Karen's driveway every single night. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a tyrant's reign coming to a sudden, violent end. Every eye was on Karen. Her face was a grotesque mask of shock and terror. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The gavel slipped from her nerveless fingers and clattered onto the table. Checkmate. The silence that followed the video presentation was heavier than any shouting match. It was a thick, suffocating blanket of collective realization. Every resident in that room was reevaluating every interaction, every fine, every condescending remark they had ever received from the woman who was now exposed as a thief and a vandal. The first person to break the silence was Mr. Henderson. He stood up slowly, his back ramrod straight, the old Marine taking command. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of moral authority that Karen's had always lacked. "Karen," he said, his disappointment palpable. "What have you done?" That was the signal. The dam of civility broke. The room exploded in a cacophony of rage and betrayal. "Thief!" someone screamed. "I want my money back," yelled another. "You slashed his tires? Are you insane?" The other board members, who had been silent spectators to Karen's reign, were now in full panic mode. The treasurer, a mousy man named Gerald, shot to his feet. "I had no idea about any of this," he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Karen. "She handled all the vendor contracts. I just signed the checks she put in front of me." Karen, finally finding her voice, tried to fight back. "This is a lie, a setup. He's a cop. He could have faked that video. He's been trying to undermine me from day one." But her denials were weak, drowned out by the chorus of angry homeowners. Her power, which had always been an illusion built on fear and paperwork, had evaporated. She was no longer the president. She was just a cornered criminal. I held up my hand, not to silence the crowd, but to focus their anger. "There's no need to argue about the video," I said, my voice cutting through the noise once more. "A criminal complaint for felony vandalism was filed with the county sheriff's department the morning of the incident. That complete, unedited footage is already in their possession as evidence. I'm confident they will conduct a thorough investigation." I then turned my gaze to the board. "And as for the financial records," I continued, "the evidence of self-dealing and potential fraud is compelling. I will be packaging it and forwarding it to the district attorney's office tomorrow morning. I'm sure their white-collar crime unit will find it very interesting." The color drained from the faces of Gerald and the other board members. Their complicity, whether through active participation or willful ignorance, was about to have very real consequences. The meeting was no longer about me or my dogs. It was a coup. Maria Rodriguez stood on a chair to be heard. "I make a motion to immediately remove Karen Peterson as president of the Oakwood Estates HOA, effective now." "Second," roared Mr. Henderson. Karen, in a last pathetic attempt to cling to power, grabbed the gavel. "You can't do that. It's not on the agenda. This is an illegal meeting." Sarah Jenkins stepped forward. "According to the bylaws, a motion to remove a board member can be made from the floor at any meeting, provided a quorum is present. We have a quorum. All in favor of removing Karen Peterson." A forest of hands shot up. It was nearly unanimous. All opposed. Karen and one elderly woman who was known to be her close friend raised their hands. "The motion carries," Sarah declared with finality. Karen Peterson is no longer president. It didn't stop there. Motion after motion followed in a rapid-fire dismantling of her regime. A motion for an immediate, independent forensic audit of all HOA finances. Passed. A motion to terminate the contract with Evergreen Prestige Landscaping. Passed. A motion to dismiss all pending fines and retract all liens issued in the past year. Pending legal review. Passed. With each vote, Karen seemed to shrink, her bright red blazer now looking like a garish costume on a defeated clown. She stood there, stunned and sputtering, as the community she had ruled with an iron fist systematically erased her from power. Finally, she seemed to realize it was over. With a strangled sob, she grabbed her purse and shoved her way through the crowd, which parted before her as if she were a leper. She fled the clubhouse into the night, not with the defiant stride of a martyr, but with the panicked scramble of a guilty party escaping the scene of the crime. The angry shouts of her former subjects followed her out the door. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. The anger was replaced by a sense of liberation and empowerment. They had faced the bully and won. They had taken their community back. I looked over at Mr. Henderson, who gave me a slow, appreciative nod. The real work was just beginning, but the war was over. In the weeks that followed Karen's public immolation, a whirlwind of change swept through Oakwood Estates. The entire old board of directors resigned en masse, issuing a joint letter full of mealy-mouthed apologies about lapses in oversight. No one was fooled. They were rats deserting a sinking ship, and everyone knew it. A special election was held to form a new board. Mr. Henderson, despite his initial reluctance, was elected the new president by an overwhelming majority. Maria Rodriguez became the vice president, and David Chun logically was made treasurer. Their first official meeting was a breath of fresh air. They sat at the same table in the same stuffy room, but the atmosphere was entirely different. There was no gavel, only conversation. The agenda was about solutions, not violations. They immediately passed a resolution to hire a reputable law firm to review and rewrite the HOA's most restrictive and ambiguous covenants. The pre-approved plant list was abolished. The rules about basketball hoops and holiday decorations were relaxed. The community, for the first time in years, started to feel less like a prison camp and more like a neighborhood. The legal and criminal proceedings moved forward with methodical precision. The forensic audit, as expected, uncovered years of systematic embezzlement. The scheme was simple. Evergreen Prestige Landscaping would submit inflated or entirely fraudulent invoices, which Karen would approve. Her brother-in-law would then kick back a percentage to a private bank account she held under her maiden name. The total amount stolen from the HOA was just shy of $200,000. Faced with an ironclad case, both Karen and Martin Gable were arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, theft, and conspiracy. The sheriff's investigation into the vandalism was equally swift. The security footage was clear. Tire tracks from her Escalade matched those found at the scene. When presented with a search warrant, they found the knife used to slash my tires in a toolbox in her garage, with microscopic traces of rubber still on the blade. Karen Peterson, the woman who terrorized people over the color of their mailboxes, was now a common felon. She eventually took a plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial and a mandatory prison sentence. She was sentenced to 5 years of probation, 1,500 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. The judge, in a moment of what I could only describe as poetic justice, ordered that her house, her castle from which she ruled her petty kingdom, be sold to cover the restitution payments. The day the for sale sign went up on her immaculate lawn was a quiet holiday for the entire neighborhood. My life returned to the peace I had originally sought, but it was a peace that felt earned, not just purchased. The violation notices stopped. The anonymous social media posts vanished. I could work with Rex and Shadow in the yard without feeling the constant glare of judgment from across the street. My dogs, the catalyst for the entire affair, became local celebrities. People would stop by on their walks to say hello, bringing them treats and thanking them for their service. The new HOA board, in one of its first official acts, passed a new bylaw specifically exempting certified service and working animals from all pet restrictions, effectively deputizing Rex and Shadow as official residents of Oakwood Estates. The final, symbolic confrontation wasn't with Karen, but with the legacy she left behind. One sunny Saturday afternoon, a few months after the new board took over, Mr. Henderson came walking across my lawn. He was holding a small, polished wooden plaque. "The board wanted you to have this, Frank," he said, handing it to me. I looked down. Engraved on a brass plate were the images of two Belgian Malinois. The inscription read, "To K-9 officers Rex and Shadow, for their heroic service and for reminding us what a true community stands for. With gratitude, the Oakwood Estates HOA." I was speechless. I looked from the plaque to my dogs, who were wrestling happily over a rope toy nearby, blissfully unaware of the suburban revolution they had started. "Thank you, John," I said, calling him by his first name. "That means a lot," he clapped me on the shoulder. "No, Frank. Thank you. You taught us that you don't have to live in fear. You just have to be willing to do the work and stand up for what's right." We stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, watching the dogs play. My gaze drifted past my yard to his house, where his American flag was flying high and proud against the blue sky, no longer a visual nuisance, but a symbol of the freedom we had reclaimed. The neighborhood was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was the sound of genuine peace, a peace born not of oppressive rules, but of mutual respect. It was the sound of a community restored. My victory wasn't just in exposing a corrupt HOA president. It was in helping my neighbors find their own voices. The battle had started over my dogs, but it had ended with the liberation of an entire community. And that was a victory far greater than I could have ever imagined.